Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk mainly about William Hook. He's a photographer I became interested in almost 20 years ago when I first moved out here. And I first found some of William Hook's glass negatives with a lady up in Cripple Creek who had them for almost 40 years. She just had about 50 of his glass plates. And we didn't know who the photographer was. We didn't know what the subject matter was, although most of them were of Indians. And that just started me as a hobby, a research project to find out first of all who the photographer was, and then once I found out it was William E. Hook, I started getting clues to his life, and each little incident in his life just really fascinated me, and I kept looking until I pretty much documented most of his life. There's a few questions about Hook I still have unanswered that I'll go through with the slides here to show you what I mean. He was a very interesting photographer. Of course, Manitou Springs had a lot of photographers. Thurlow, Harlan, Heasted, of course, even Jackson came through here. But Hook, we're finding out, may have had more of a hand in helping Manitou Springs become a tourist community because his photos were so widely published. This is Hook probably just above Rainbow Falls in Ute Pass. I'm going to apologize ahead of time too, because I have a whole notebook full of notes that I forgot to bring all together, so I'm going to be ad-libbing tonight. I think I can remember the facts, but I won't guarantee the dates. Let me just give you a quick background of Hook, because his career was remarkable long before he came to Manitou Springs. He was born in 1833 in Titchfield, England. He married when he was about 28, I believe, and had 7 children. One soon died. It wasn't too long after the birth of his last child, Alfred, in 1867, that he took his wife and all 6 kids to his in-laws' house in Newport on the Isle of Wight, and he left for America. And basically what you're going to see here is that Hook was separated from his wife and family for 20 years, pretty much. He made several trips back to England, but it was 20 years before he got to Manitou Springs, and that's when he finally sent for his wife. He went immediately to Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and on top of setting up a photo studio there, he set up a theater, like a vaudeville theater, so to speak, in the 1870s, that brought in all the national acts of the day. And he did portraits and pictures of people's farms and ranches. And it wasn't too long after he was there, he became fascinated with the Indians of the region and started photographing them. This is a group of Chippewas here. And Chippewas again. This is in Minnesota here. Winnebagos. And for some reason, he had a very successful career in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. His theater was widely visited, and he even got into politics a little bit. But somewhere around 1876, he had gone over to England, but he came back with only 2 of his sons. And one of the sons, who was 18, died within 45 days after arriving at Chippewa Falls. And his other son, Willie, went to school there, and as soon as Willie graduated high school, Hook started advertising to sell all of his properties, because he had a general store and he had a bowling alley and all kind of properties in Wisconsin. When he didn't get a sale for everything, he just took off anyway, and on this trip, while he was gone, everything he had was lost. It was repossessed. But I'm guessing it was the Indians that forced him to take a look at his photography in terms of giving people pictures of things that they had never seen before. So he went to Benton, Montana, and then up into what's now Alberta. And he was the first photographer to ever photograph the Northwest Canadian Mounted Police. This is in about 76, I believe, or 78, which is not too long after the Mounties were formed, primarily to clean up the whiskey forts in Canada. These are some Mounties by the burial of Chief Red Dog, who supposedly was one of the participants at the Little Bighorn and died after the Sioux had escaped into Canada. Hook also was probably the first white man outside of the Canadian Mounties to go into Sitting Bull's camp. One thing I'm still looking into, it's a big mystery, is that the very first photo of Sitting Bull, there were actually 3 taken that day, but the famous one with the one feather of Sitting Bull, there's controversy over who actually took that photo now, and it's possible that it may have been Hook that took that one. This is a family, their name were the Gopher family, they called them. He photographed a lot of the Assiniboine, Chippewa, different Indians in that area, that Nez Perce. They were pretty much on their most desperate times. The Assiniboines here, in fact, this family, it's most likely they were prostitutes. They were pretty destitute at this point. So even though Hook took a lot of great photos of the Indians, it's not the type of photo that, you know, the people who were buying Indian photos wanted to see. So he probably didn't have very good sale on these type of photos. After traveling around in Canada, in Yellowstone, extensively photographed in Yellowstone for a few years, he went back to Wisconsin, discovered he lost all of his properties, and he went to some other small towns in Wisconsin like Neenah and up to Marquette, Michigan, and opened a studio. And how he came to Manitou Springs is still a mystery to me. He came on April 11th, 1885, to take over the management of Mrs. Galbraith's photograph studio. So it's possible Mrs. Galbraith may have advertised in a photographic journal back then. But one curiosity, when I was searching the records of all the ships that arrived in New York from England, trying to find exactly when Hook came over, which I still have not found. I know the date from his naturalization papers, but that time when he was supposed to have come over, there was a Mrs. A. Galbraith who came from England at the same time, so he may have known her ahead of time. But in 1885, this is about what Manitou would have looked like. About 700 people. That's the old Hiawatha House, of course, in the foreground. And he took many wonderful pictures. One of the first things he did, though, that really caught the newspaper's attention was he went to the Manitou Grand Caverns. The Cave of the Winds actually opened up in 1885, the year that Hook got there. That's when George Snyder first opened it. So before then, the big tourist stop was the Manitou Grand Caverns. And Hook invented his own chemistry light source. He was always reading the old chemical journals and that were put out with the photographic journals, so he was deeply into his art. But he was the first one to go, getting ahead of myself here, into the Grand Caverns to photograph. This is the Barker House a little bit later on than when Hook arrived there. When he arrived in 1885, C.W. Barker had just purchased the old Thurlow house and buildings from the Thurlow estate. Thurlow had died, I think, about 5 years before this. And of course, Barker incorporated the Thurlow house and several other houses and built them all together to make the Barker house. So this is probably a later photo in the 1890s here. But Hook's studio, Barker let Mrs. Galbraith keep her studio and Mrs. Thurlow keep her shop, which would have been at the west end of the building. I think you can almost see a striped awning type of thing there. It's where a parking lot is now. And Hook took over the management of her studio. And here we're getting into some of those first photos ever taken in the Manitou Grand Cavern. The newspaper said it was a calcium light source, but I don't think calcium's flammable, so I'm not too sure how that worked, unless they just made a mistake. Calcium carbide? Okay, thanks. Of course, the main business Mrs. Galbraith was in was taking portraits. But I think Hook, probably when he first got there, saw the bustling tourist trade. And within a few months after joining Mrs. Galbraith, he was no longer in the studio. he was set up in a tent at the old toll booth for the Pikes Peak Trail and taking the pictures of the tourists. When they rode up in the morning, he'd take their pictures, and then he had them ready when they came down that night. This is up by Minnehaha Falls. I'd always wondered if maybe Hook and Mrs. Galbraith had a falling out, but I don't think so, because Mrs. Galbraith, after Hook set up at the toll booth, she leased her studio and gallery to photographers named Smith and Wyman. I think Mrs. Galbraith bought the studio from the Thurlow estate. Originally she was in business with two other gentlemen, Harvey and Lyles, and Galbraith was the name of the studio. And then by the time Hook got there, she had the studio all to herself. And when Hook set up at the Pikes Peak Toll Road, she rented it to Smith and Wyman. This would have been about June or July. Within a couple of months later, there's all kind of articles in the paper about how there seems to be an argument over who's going to take over the studio. And then there's another article that says something basically that the tempest fugit or something like that, but both parties look like they might win. And right after the tourist season, Hook is back managing and taking the studio portraits, and Mrs. Galbraith and Smith and Wyman have found another location. This is Hidden Falls, by the way, on Ruxton Creek, which was a favorite spot for taking pictures of the tourist. This is just a little dark, but he took pictures of campers and just people hiking along the Pikes Peak Trail. This, of course, is an old map that shows when they were talking about running the Cog Railroad up Crystal Park. But if you notice in the top center there, that's Manitou, and you can see Engelman Canyon coming out of it. And I put that in there to show you, if you go straight down from the E in Engelman Canyon, you'll see Gog and Magog Rock. I'm sure you're all familiar with those rocks. And just to the left of that is the trail that comes down out of Crystal Park into what's now called Artist Glen. Well, Hook named Artist Glen. That was his property. When he's taking pictures of the tourist on the Pikes Peak Trail, I'm sure he met and became friends with Tom Palsgrove, who Mike's going to talk about here a little bit later, and got to know Pikes Peak as well as anybody. And when he passed this little valley that goes up Cameron's Cone from Ruxton Creek, he went to Pueblo and filed homestead papers to homestead the property. And then he and his friends, Tom and John Palsgrove, built this one-room cabin. It's maybe about 40 feet from Ruxton Creek, if you've ever been up to Artist Glen. And it was about this time that he decided it was maybe time to go get his family from England. This is about 1887. An interesting note, during this whole time he's trying to homestead the property. As it turned out, after his family was out here, he went and made a $200 settlement on it and purchased it outright. But in the course of trying to get the homestead, he's writing a letter to the clerk in Pueblo saying that he would like the clerk to expedite the homestead proceedings because he had been separated from his family for 20 years and he was anxious to go back and get them. He's been away from them for a long time, and it's interesting to note that this letter was written to the clerk about a month and a half after his family was already back at this house here, so he's not above a little deceit, I guess. This is a picture I took of Artist Glen about 7 or 8 years ago. You can see the cog tracks down below there, and so the creek would be just at the bottom of the photo, Ruxton Creek. Nothing there now. I've done a lot of digging around up there and turned up a lot of the square-sided nails and some charred wood and melted glass if you go down about 12 inches or so, so I'm sure it burned down. Here's Hook's picture of almost the same angle. You can see they added a two-story addition onto the little house that they originally built, and Hook's wife and daughter opened it up as a bed and breakfast type of stop for people hiking on the trail. You can just barely see Hook up there in the center off of the tree there. He had a little sign up for everything, it looks like, from his photographs. And he named them all with family and meaningful names. Theo Falls, that was Theodore. Theo is what they called him, was the name of the son that died immediately upon arriving in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. You can see another sign back there that said Artist Glen. That creek right there is actually called Baby Brook for the baby that died soon after childbirth. And behind the house it was called Mount Eleanor, which is his wife's name. So he built a real Garden of Eden. He had dams that he cultivated fish. He built hundreds of feet of trail all around the place just to get up to Cameron's Cone and go back into Dark Canyon without going up Engelman Canyon. As I mentioned, George Snyder opened up the Cave of the Winds in 1885, and Hook got to know him pretty well. And with Snyder's help, this is the road that goes up to the Cave of the Winds, Temple Drive. With Snyder's help, different lecturers and scientists and people from all around the world began buying Hook's photographs in sets of 50 that would give, you know, it'd be all 50 photos like on the Cave of the Winds or the Garden of the Gods or a mixture of Manitou. And these went all around the world by way of lecturers who would give magic lantern slideshows in the United States and in Europe. Here's another view of Temple Drive. You can see the little house there. That's the entrance to the Cave of the Winds on the right.
What year was that?
This is an early number, so I'm guessing this could be 1886 to 87. Hook, luckily for me, had a numbering system that went chronologically. It's almost, as I've been finding Hook photographs, I've been putting them into the computer, and then I can sort them by my number or by Hook's number. And when you sort them by Hook's number, it's almost like getting a diary. You can just follow his trips. And in fact, in Canada, I know the exact route that he went and the exact date that he was at every place, just from his numbering system. Here's some in the Cave of the Winds now, Dante's Inferno. Don't know if these were the first ones in Cave of the Winds like they were the Grand Caverns, but pretty early. Almost immediately after getting his family out here, Hook joined forces and started a corporation with Tom Posgrove. Manitou's mayor at that time was M.A. Leddy. He was in this group. S.W. Sawan, and there's one other one I can't recall right now, but they were going to build a toll wagon road to the summit of Pikes Peak. And they were going to incorporate most of the Pikes Peak Trail. The Pikes Peak Trail incorporated some of like the early Ruxton Trail, but it was one of the early trails. And of course, this is just below the Iron Springs here. They formed the corporation. They received their money backing. Unfortunately, just about 2 months before they got started, another company up in Cascade, Colorado, had the same idea. And they started building a toll wagon road out of some old ranchers' roads that went up the peak. And it was almost like a race, according to the paper. Both were getting publicity back and forth. And then at one point, there was an article in the paper where it said they both needed, this is of course, the Pikes Peak carriage road, the one out of Cascade. The paper said that for them to get to the beyond the military reservation, which is where the Signal Service Station was, it was part of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, they needed an act of Congress to build the roads any further than that boundary. So Hook and his company, being upright and wanting to keep it legal, they stopped building. We found there's some journals of the sergeant who was manning the Signal Service Station at this point. And they were thinking of closing the station at that point too. Where the people out of Cascade were working at night and when it was foggy and bad weather. And he was even requesting federal troops to come out and stop them. But none were sent. And so it's getting pretty crowded on top of Pikes Peak, but unfortunately when the act of Congress finally came through, the toll road out of Cascade was already complete. And so Hook's company closed up shop. Otherwise, we would have had a highway right out of Manitou here to go up to the summit. As you can see here, they added on to Artist Glen quite a bit. And they were very good friends with the Posgroves. It's even mentioned in Mary Posgrove Ho's book that the Hooks were friends, and there's Hook's daughters and Tom and John up there on the bridge above the water. I was talking earlier, Hook did a lot of portraits, but they're so hard to find because those have stayed within the family. About the only portraits I've been able to find have been from Hook's own family and from the Posgrove family. They were that close. And that's the Posgrove and the Hook girls up there on the rock. And probably Mrs. Hook, if I remember right, in the white dress down below the rock there. Another one showing the old hotel above the Iron Springs. It was about this time that they began talking about running the cog railroad up Engelman Canyon. And the proposed route really had Hook upset because it was going to run 30 feet from his front door at Artist Glen. Others were faring a lot better, of course, you know, probably getting ahead of myself. Another one at the Cliff House here. Let me see where I'm at before I talk about the cog here. Just some different Manitou pictures by Hook. It's looking down Canyon Avenue. Cliff House there on the left. It's the Iron Springs. You can see the old Hiawatha there on the left and the bridge that is still a bridge there, but not that bridge, I guess. And this is the other bridge at the other end of course, Memorial Park there was originally the grounds for the Manitou House Hotel. And this is looking at the bridge on the west side of that area at Grace Greenwood's cottage. And the Y for the Denver and Rio Grande, which is about where the Villa Motel is now. And that's the Manitou House in the background on the left there. And the old depot just peeking over the edge there on the left. And this would be the Manitou House, of which behind it was the 7 Minute Springs, I believe. The grounds for the Manitou House, and back there about where the statue is now was a grass tennis court. Doesn't show up too well in here. And the Briarhurst, I'm sure this is one of his later numbers, so this would have been in the early 1890s probably. And this is the old Midland Bridge over Ruxton Avenue. The little building in the lower right there is an ice cream store. The Red Crags. I need to talk to them. I know they have this picture at the Red Crags too, and they say that's Teddy Roosevelt on the horse in front. But Teddy Roosevelt came much later, I think. Here we're getting into the cog now. When they came through surveying, of course, Posgrove got a good deal. He got what was supposed to have been a lifetime pass on the cog for his whole family, and they were going to put a siding in there. It could do nothing but help his business at the halfway house, but of course the incline is too steep at Artist Glen. With the train not stopping there, but yet running 30 feet from the front door, it kind of ruined the Garden of Eden feeling that Hook had for the place. In fact, George White was telling me he knew Hook's grandson pretty well. And it was right about the time the Cog Railroad started that Hook closed up Artist Glen, and he moved over to Tejon Street in Colorado Springs, although they came back every summer to open up Artist Glen for many years after that. And here's one he took of the halfway house. And this would be the siding that the Cog ended up putting in at the halfway house. When the Cog was negotiating for the homesteaders and the landowners on Pikes Peak, at this point, Hook and his entire family had 800 acres on Pikes Peak. That started all the way from Artist Glen. He purchased another property for himself, which I'll show here in a minute, and then all of his children purchased property around what's now Big Tooth Reservoir. The Cog was having trouble with the Iron Spring Chateau in getting the rights for their track, and with the Hooks. Hook was asking $3,000 for them to run the track through his property, and the Cog was offering $500, so there's a big difference there. The Cog threatened, I guess through Manitou, threatened condemnation proceedings, and I didn't see anything more in the paper until there's a notice, a deed of sale in the paper listed when Hook sold the right-of-way for their track for $300. And you can see that's Artist Glen right there, and you can see how close the tracks came to the door, right in between the house and Ruxton Creek. Oops, I'm sorry, I'll go back here. In spite of all this, Hook probably had his biggest success in selling pictures. He sold tens of thousands of this one here, of his burro. That was his burro named Marshall Van Booker. That's Booker with a B-U with an umlaut over the U. And there's Marshall Van Booker again with the old way and the new. This was on the second homestead that he, he did a cash settlement on his first one, then he got another 160 acres that was along the southern slopes of Cameron's Cone. And he built this pretty small house, and it was interesting that after his family got out here, after being separated for 20 years, that it's reported in different accounts that Hook spent most of his time up at this place, and that his wife had altitude sickness, which it was probably bad enough at Artist Glen, but up here it was much higher. And this is, of course, they eventually moved to Colorado Springs. This is Kiowa Street looking from the Deaf and Blind Institute. Just so you show you some of his photos now that he was famous for. He, on top of his scenics, he had a series that he ran for years called Gems of Manitou, and it always featured little kids in burros, and these were big sellers for the tourists. Down here. I'm not too sure if that's the Barker House or the Cliff House there. And the old bathhouse in the background there. This I just threw in because it was a people picture, but it's some sort of an oriental pageant that they held here in Manitou that Hook photographed. He photographed a lot of church groups and different things. From the newspaper accounts that I've read, they call Hook congenial, so I know he was friendly, but back then they used to publish the guests that would attend different social events and parties and things, and the Hooks were never on that. But so I don't know how congenial he really was, but on top of that threatened lawsuit with the Cog Railroad, he also got into a lawsuit with Colorado Springs when they tried to run the water line down from the reservoirs. They were going to run that through his property, and he lost on that one too. This is the Narrows in Williams Canyon. Just some more tourist photographs here. Of course, Rainbow Falls. And getting into Garden of the Gods. He was the first one in the Rocky Mountains to hand color his photographs. So all these color ones that you see were each one was individually hand watercolored by Hook. This one, I've been trying to find all these rock formations to do then and now photographs, and this one took me a couple of years, and then when I saw it, I felt so stupid, because there it was. It's right there where, on El Paso, where, I'm drawing a blank, on the road that goes up to Balanced Rock. Is that Garden of the Gods Road, I guess? Pardon? High Street. Yeah, it'd be Garden of the Gods Road then. It's right there on the northeast corner. And it's a little misleading because that's a billboard, but the rock's probably no taller than I am. Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to finish up here, just show you some of his hand-colored magic lantern slides. See if I can get that in better focus. Now, I can't tell. I don't think this is the Manitou House again. I think this is the Mansions, isn't it? Manitou House? Okay. I guess they're the only ones that had that fence. His hand-colored prints were definitely more dramatic. It was kind of hard to watercolor on glass like this. Yeah. Hook kind of went downhill from, this is when the trolley was running up to the depot. From the time he moved to Colorado Springs, he almost lost his house to foreclosure again in 1900. And he put it on the market just in time, and his son, Willie, bought a house on Cache La Poudre for him, and that's where Hook died. That's a little dark, but that's the halfway house.
So how old were you?
He was 77, 1833 to 1908. He had myxedemia, which was a thyroid failure. And so from the last picture you'll see here in a minute, he became bloated, and according to the symptoms, he probably had slowed actions and slurred speech. But what really was heartbreaking for him probably was he did all of his Canadian travels, Yellowstone travels, with his son Willie, and that's Willie in the middle, and his two daughters, that's Nellie on the left and Alice on the right. Alice married Edward de la Verne, who became a state senator and was responsible for starting Cripple Creek up. When Willie got out here, of course he bailed his father out with the houses. Then he went to work as a night watchman in Ed de la Verne's mine at Elkton in 1907 and had a heart attack and died, or what everybody thought was a heart attack. They did an autopsy and discovered that he had died of a stomach ulcer at the age of 47. So Hook basically lost all of his sons then. This is the last photo of Hook here. Once he was in Manitou, though, he was able to get to California, New Mexico, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and extensively photographed those areas. So right now I've located probably about over 1,600 of Hook's photographs. So he was a pretty prolific photographer. Of course, he probably always had selling to the tourist in mind, or like when he was in Canada, he sold his pictures and sometimes his glass negatives as he went to pay for his trip. So a little bit about Mr. Hook then. Thanks.
My name is Mike Doty. I work for the Cog Railway. I've been up there for 6 years. I'm the historian for the railway, also an engineer up there. This time of year, a mechanic. We're working on the equipment getting ready to open in April. I have tried to find a lot of different pictures through the years, being the historian for the railway. Along the railway, I fell in love with the area just below Dark Canyon many, many years ago, as Tom Paulsgrove did, about 100 years ago. I'm currently working on a book on a hotel that was up there, the halfway house. one of the big questions we get is why is it called the halfway house? The main reason for that is it is halfway from the Rio Grande Station in downtown Colorado Springs to the summit of Pikes Peak. For many years it was called the Trail House, and later on they changed it to the halfway house. Any of you have ever taken the train up Pikes Peak, the conductor right around this area always says on the two-seat side or the left side of the train, we're going to be passing a small clearing. There used to stand a 22-room hotel here known as the Halfway House. Unfortunately, it was torn down in 1926. If you look off this way, you can see what remains of the burro stable. But a lot of people have no idea what they're talking about. They look over there and see this small clearing. They can kind of see remains of the burro stable, and then suddenly you're out of the area. This is looking from roughly where the front door of the hotel stood back toward the train. That's about as how far away as the hotel was from everything. It was built as a one-room cabin in 1878. It went up to a 22-room hotel and was torn down in 1926. I'll tell you a little more about that later. The hotel stood about 2.5 miles up the railway from the Cog Depot, just below Ruxton Park, where there's a hydroelectric plant up there. Originally, it was built by the Booth brothers, Manville and Edward Booth. They got the property in 1877 and built this one-room log cabin building there. They held on to it for a few years. Tom Paulsgrove came out to the area. He was a rancher out east. He tried mining up in the mountains, and he finally got a contract from Hall to haul firewood up the old Pikes Peak Trail up to the U.S. Army Signal Station. Well, he passed this place every day, and it was all boarded up in 1878. He fell in love with the area, did some research, and found out that the Booth brothers had sold it to a W.A. Richards out of Wyoming. This gentleman was down here one time with his family. They did not like the area, so he never came back. W.A. Richards later on became governor of Wyoming in the late 1890s, but Paulsgrove pursued him and bought 160 acres here and then got the homestead rights in 1882. His family was down in the Springs. They came up here during the summer months and found the one-room cabin with a bedroom loft above, and loved the area too. Every winter they would come down. Well, the first winter, Tom and his brother John went back up there a little early. They did a lot of work on the hotel. They added a little bit extension, another 3 rooms. This is them passing Artist Glen. This is Tom Paulsgrove on the horse holding his daughter Mary. His stepson Harry's on the front burro. His wife Nettie and their other daughter Mabel is on the second burro with Nettie's grandmother or mother behind them. Like I said, during that winter they did that first addition. The original cabin is in the far background, and as you come toward us, this is the first addition they did to the cabin. They spent all summer there and part of the winter up there that second year. They also tried ranching up there and growing some crops. The altitude at 9,000 feet didn't do any good for growing crops, and they had some problems with some of the mountain lions and stuff with the cattle, and the cattle getting loose all over the mountain because nothing was fenced in or anything. They came back down like they did every year. But this is the original cabin with the new addition. The sign on it does say, I think, the Trail House. With the Pikes Peak Trail, a couple hundred yards away from them, a lot of people were stopping by and just asking if they could get something to drink or something to eat. And that became more and more people came there. This was pre the Cog Railway. So they decided, well, maybe we can keep adding some room and rent out some space like a bed and breakfast. This is looking toward Hell's Gate. This is South Fork of Ruxton, kind of behind that little burro shelter there. This is before the Cog Railway was built. They built this little stable-like looking thing right in front of the hotel because the people would ride burros up there, and Tom said that no lady was not going to get off and jump down on the ground, so he had a little stool there to be dignified. Let's see here. This picture is the one that I think is one of the most rarest that I've come across. That baby carriage there, then there is Alice Paulsgrove. She died of smallpox here in Colorado Springs. She's buried at Evergreen. This is the only picture I've ever seen of her. They came up there in the summer. She was up there, and then she died in June. Last year, one of our guys that works section crew up there was playing around in one of the dump sites at the hotel. We found one of those baby carriage wheels in the dump. So it's Mary Paulsgrove is standing on the tree, the bench. Her father is right next to her there. Paul showed you this a little earlier. This is the beginning of the Pikes Peak Trail. Burro parties, that was the way to go up the peak. You could either hike up the Pikes Peak Trail, take a burro party. A lot of people did it. They tried closing it for a while and charging a toll. Tom Paulsgrove found out about it, came down here and tore down. There was a fence right behind here. Said, you're not going to charge people to come up here. And they had a big fight, and he finally won. Again, the hotel, they've already added the second addition now to the left behind that tree. They've added another wing, kind of like the first edition. We're up to 15 rooms now here at the hotel. One way I have found all the hundreds of pictures I've found of the hotel that exist of dating the pictures. Behind the horses, there's a fence back in there. There have been 4 styles of fences, and I've narrowed it down now, so it's kind of easy to date some of the pictures. Also, there's 4 pine trees in front of the bay window that grow up through the years. This here is the 3rd style of fence. This is the 2nd style of fence, right before the Cog Railway was built. This is looking again at Hell's Gate. You can see the creek coming down there. On the train, we always say it was the only natural opening to the summit of Pikes Peak. Well, if you take this picture today from the same spot, we did blow a lot of rock out of there to put the railway down. They also had trails built, Tom Paulsgrove built trails up to Grandview Rock, up through where Big Tooth Reservoir is to the summit of Pikes Peak. They used to pick strawberries on the south slopes of Cameron's Cone. They had a water fountain out in front. This is Tom and Harry up at the water fountain out in front of the hotel. Another view of the 2nd style fencing. They added a flagpole. They flew the U.S. flag every day while they were up there during the summer. This is the whole gang. We're kind of jumping back a little bit. This is the 1st style fence right before they went to the 2nd style. You can see the kind of V-shaped thing. The dog Rover that just kind of wandered up there became their dog. Harry's on the chair. His sister Mary's right behind him. The gentleman with the stick is Tom Paulsgrove. Over behind Harry is John Paulsgrove and his brother Elmer Paulsgrove. They all came from Pennsylvania. In 1888, a very proper gentleman from Kenosha, Wisconsin came out to Manitou Springs. He stayed down at the Cliff House. He was treated to a 2-day burro trip up to the summit of Pikes Peak. One of his co-inventions with a gentleman by the name of Poole was the glass telegraph insulator. He wanted to see how the telegraph line up to the Army signal station was holding up in the Arctic conditions. He came back down to Manitou and said that was the most hideous ride he'd ever had in his life, but the scenery was beautiful. Hulbert got a hold of him and they said, hey, you need to put some money out here. So he invested $1.5 million in 1888 and they started construction of the Manitou and Pikes Peak Cog Railway. His name is Zaman Simmons. You don't recognize the name from being the founder of our railway, but he also founded the Simmons Beauty Rest Mattress Corporation. So he's very much into comfort. And he formed the Manitou and Pikes Peak Cog Railway. It was an 8.9 mile thing. Started at Manitou Springs, went up to the summit of Pikes Peak. It was the 2nd attempt to build a railway. The first one had failed. The Pikes Peak Narrow Gauge Improvement Railway was going to be built. A narrow gauge railway up around Crystal Park, up by Lake Moraine and up. Unfortunately, the people did not trust the banks in Colorado. They put their money in a bank in New York City and the bank collapsed. So the hopes of that first railway ended. Like Paul said, this photograph was taken between 1894 and 1897. One reason I can date that is there are boards between the rail on the Cog Railway. One of the provisions that Tom Paulsgrove made for them building the railway through his property is everywhere the train or the trail past the old where the track is, they had to put boards in so the burros could get across. So the first 4 years there were boards running the entire length of the railway. This is one of the construction photos. They're testing some equipment. This is just above Artist Glen, up near milepost 1. And this is one of the first 3 engines that came. This was the Pikes Peak, the Manitou, and the Richardson were the first 3. Now, the railway the last spike was driven on July 28, 1890. They ran trains the first year to the halfway house. This is the first train ever to be on the halfway house track. It is a test train. It was late October 28th when they completed the rail to the summit of Pikes Peak. They decided that it was too late to run passengers because they didn't have the advertising and everything. They'd start it the next spring. Unfortunately, the next spring was a very snowy spring, and they didn't get up there again until June. But that first couple months, this could be kind of hard to see, they did advertise a little bit that you could go to the halfway house and Grandview Rock. So they were running trains from Manitou up there. This is one of the first passenger trains up there. Guy was up there. They used to run people up there. You could go. They called it squirrel hunting expeditions. But this is October and early November 1890. And that's not going to be good in this light. But this is the first timetable. It cost 87 cents the round trip up to the halfway house in 1890. On June 30th, 1891, a big gala was planned. That was going to be the first run of all the officials and everybody to the summit of Pikes Peak via the Cog Railway. This is one of the, what do you want to call it, high mucky muck trains. The first two trains took out of here at 9:20. The gentleman with the top hat to the left of the tree is Zaman Simmons. Unfortunately, they got up near Windy Point and found out that a rock slide had happened, so all these guys never made it to the summit of Pikes Peak on that first train. They came back down to halfway. Some of them wandered around hiked up around there. They had their picture taken. That afternoon, a Denver Highlands Christian choir was the first passengers to make it to the summit of Pikes Peak 108 years ago. Well, there was 5 provisions that Tom Paulsgrove wanted for the run of his property. He owned the property roughly from where the lower bridge is and what we call Icebox Canyon all the way up through Ruxton Park. The 5 things were his family got free transport on any train for the rest of their lives. All trains had to stop at this point at the railway. They had concession rights. Their people could come on the train and sell them hiking sticks, rocks, bubble gum, you name it. And that everywhere that the trail passed, the site, they had to build those wood planks across because they didn't want to hurt the burro trade. This is about 1896. In 1897, these engines went back to Philadelphia. They changed the cylinder configuration. They weren't working right. And this is right before the depot was built. That was the last provision. A depot had to be built at the hotel. This is just above the spur at the halfway house. And it's kind of dark, but you can see to the left there, this is the depot that stood up there for many years. This is where every train stopped. There was also a water tank there for emergency water. It wasn't used that much. This was also a United States Post Office from 1902 through 1912. 3 times a week, they would run, not on the train, but they'd run down by Burro. The U.S. mail down, it would be marked Halfway, Colorado. The building to the right on the front of this photograph is the Ninacocus Lodge. It was very popular around the turn of the century if you owned an establishment to have a billiard hall or a bowling alley. This was a 1-lane bowling alley. They also had billiard hall. Later on, this became light housekeeping rooms when that didn't work that great, and a dark room studio. And again, the second style fencing. This is right around 1903, the hotel. Now later on, on the second floor, they did make an outside staircase on the left side here. They also put balconies up there. This is about 1907. As you can see, like I said, those 3 trees grow through the years. In 1905, Tom Paulsgrove and his wife Nettie decided that her doctor said that she should get out of the area. The altitude was getting to her. So they sold interest in the hotel. His brother John had majority stockholding. 5 people from Nebraska, M.B. Reese being one of them, bought like 7/32 and 10. It was a weird breakdown of the hotel, and they retained rights up to the end. And his brother John took over running the hotel. John did start work on the second story. Him and his wife, Jenny, never had any kids. Mary Paulsgrove was kind of like their adopted daughter, that she was always up there with them. And they had worked helping his brother Tom for years run the hotel. He owned some property just above the hotel side. This is Mary, one of the postcards they used to sell up there. It's Mary Paulsgrove leaning against the tree there. They had paths walking all over. This is Nettie Paulsgrove on the horse, lady, Tom's wife. And like I said, that is where they got off the burros. You could take the burro over to that little thing and just walk off. There's a chair standing on that. Colored version of the same photograph. The big thing that became popular that Tom Paulsgrove started was toboggans, Go Devils or scooters, something we no longer have on the railway. The original one started center of the rail. You put a piece of board over the rack rail, you put two boards out, you bounce yourself, and you came flying down the hill using your feet for brakes. The more modern ones that the railway used to use up until '68, we clamp over the outside rail. You have a piece of tire underneath with a stick holding back, and that breaks you down. They've been banned since '68 because now we grease the outer rail, and they say we wouldn't be able to stop. We still have a couple of them up there, and I've been told they are fun, but people used to use anything to come down the rail. I've read newspaper accounts of rocks being balanced on the track as a 25% grade, shovels. A guy in 1918 tried a champagne bottle, broke and cut his artery, and he bled to death. But people have tried anything. Again, that's the depot on the left side. That's Eagle's Roost is the rock on straight in the middle. That's Hell's Gate where the railroad goes through. On the right side is Castle Dome and Eagle's Roost. We do often see golden eagles flying around up there even still today. In the halfway house, this is some of the remodeling done in 1910. They've redone the bridge here. They're just about to add a second gazebo back there. Way in the background you can see the second style burro stable up there. It was across the creek and away from the hotel. It was very popular for people to either in Manitou or at the halfway house rent burros, go to the summit of Pikes Peak. In Manitou, they'd leave about 2 in the afternoon. They'd come up to the halfway house. They'd get something light to eat. Then they'd go up to around where we have Mountain View today. They'd spend the evening there till about 2 in the morning. Then they continue on and watch the sun come up on Pikes Peak. Get another view of the halfway house. Harry and Barry on the burro with Tom Paulsgrove standing there. Like I said, it was very popular to sell postcards. Now, when the kids, that was their job. When the train stopped to go sell them, I've got some of the stuff over on this table here, stuff I have found up at the halfway house with you. But it was very popular for them to sell rock specimens. Smoky quartz, rose quartz, Amazonite. They also, there's a big aspen grove behind there, would make walking sticks for the hikers. Manitou mineral water. Blackjack, Beeman's, and Pepsin chewing gum was very popular for them to sell. One year they tried selling alcoholic beverages up there, but their father found that the empty bottles the kids were drinking the remains of, so he quickly put a stop to that. And like I said, up until probably the late 50s, it was very popular to hike up the railway. Then more people started taking Bar Trail. This is very dark, but this is going through Hell's Gate at Ruxton Park. I have been told that early on when they ran the Pikes Peak Hill Climb on Labor Day way back when, that people by the hundreds would be walking up the track in the evenings and the early morning hours to go watch the race. George White has told me he remembers walking up there, and it's something to see 2 in the morning, like ghost shapes walking up the big hill at Timberline. All you'd see was people by like a mass exodus. In the hotel right around 1908. The other end, that sign on the left or on the right side says tours start here for Grandview Rock. I'll show you a picture a little later of Grandview Rock. Grandview Rock is a point just north of the hotel. It's about a mile hike. It is a point that once you get to the top of, you get an excellent view of the Pikes Peak and the city. Every 4th of July, they shot fireworks off there for the hotel guest. Another one of the toboggans. That is John Paulsgrove. And I think it's bad enough coming down there trying to stop yourself, but he has a dog on his lap. A Labrador, in fact. This is after the 1910, or 1912, after Jenny Paulsgrove left, W.C. and R.C. Harris took over running the hotel. They did a major remodeling trying to get some of the trade back. They added the balconies, they added the 2 gazebos, they rebuilt all the swings around the trees and stuff. And about the same time as they were doing that, Manitou Incline was built to build the pipeline to haul water from Ruxton Park to the top of Mount Manitou Incline and come down. This is up on Cabin Creek. This is the bridge that's still up there today. It's an iron viaduct now, however. Again, some of the remodeling and the new swings. And this would be the last picture, or one of the last pictures, when Jenny and her mother were up there at the halfway house. Jenny Paulsgrove divorced John Paulsgrove and took over running the hotel. She got all his property. He moved to Oregon. Unfortunately, one night she was doing laundry out back. It was a dirt floor thing. She reached up to pull off the light and was electrocuted. They ran a special train up to bring her body down. There was a huge investigation of what happened. People were blaming the Pikes Peak power plant, which had a powerhouse down at Minnehaha, that faulty wiring, static electricity, whatever. They later found, the Board of Inquiry found out that John Paulsgrove and Tom Paulsgrove, when they wired the halfway house, had ran telephone wire stapled to the tree, and that's her standing barefoot on the dirt floor made her a conductor, and she was electrocuted. Her father took over the hotel, and he sold it to the Dolinsky. Or his name was Dolinsky. He sold it to the Harrises. This is an early ad. Like I said, they fixed up the place. This happened in 1916 or 1914. The hotel stayed open and was ran by the Harrises until 1916. That year, the city bought the property. They were buying all the property on Pikes Peak to make it a pure watershed area. The hotel was stayed open and ran actually till 1921 with the Harrises. In 1921, it closed for the public. They boarded it up. In 1922, some groups of kids, hikers, broke into it, set a fire in the fireplace, a log rolled out and burned about a 6-foot by 8-foot hole in the floor, and it was boarded back up. The 1912 remodeling, also on the right side, you can see where it says halfway house. They built a lunchroom addition to it, so they could have people that were still hiking up could go get their lunch and take it out of there. They were tired of people staying in the hotel. And this is some of the last years it was open to the public. Just another ad from one of the last years. This is the property being sold to the city in 1916. This is the fire in 1922. Luckily, the people up at Ruxton Park saw the smoke came down and put it out. But then in 1926, the city decided it was too much of a danger to leave that wood structure empty sit up there. They were building the new Big Tooth Reservoir Water Project, Reservoir number 1 on the peak. So they decided to tear down the hotel and use all the material to build the construction camps about 4 miles away from the hotel up Dark Canyon. This is the last known photograph of the halfway, or one of them. This was taken May 14th, 1926. The hotel was totally demolished in May 26th, 1926. The sign over there says City of Colorado Springs Watershed Area. Stay out. There's a hefty fine. This is the only picture I've ever seen of the back side of the hotel. And about all that remains up there today is what remains of the Burro stable. Now, these stables were intact up until about 1976, I've been told by a lot of people. In fact, I've got pictures of them in 1976. Some kids were up there goofing around and decided to knock the logs over. They thought that was kind of fun. But that's about the only thing that's still up there. This is the spillway coming out of Big Tooth. This is Dark Canyon, the upper end of it. There are burro trails. I'll show you a slide a little later on that have not been used in over 70 years, and you can still walk right down them. But this is the spillway for Big Tooth Reservoir. Dark Canyon is a very beautiful canyon coming down there. This is Ruxton Creek coming down it. Okay, this is the original cabin again in 1878, 1882. What it looked like then. So what the same area looks like today. This is the hotel in 1885. Same shot today. The main fireplace in the main living room of the hotel. That's what's left of the fireplace. The far fireplace over there was in the kitchen. Back side of the hotel in 1926. Back side of the hotel in 1996. Paulsgrove built a lot of trails going up Dark Canyon, a lot of little bridges. This is off a postcard that was popular back then. That's what it looked like then. That's roughly what it looks like today. Looking from the west side of the hotel, looking kind of southeast, that's the original cabin's in the center with the 2 additions on either end. That's taken about 1888, 1889. That's what it looks like today. The stone foundations are still there from the hotel. If you get up there early enough before all the grass grows up and all the flowers come out. The railway, as it was right before the depot was built in 1892. Now, in 1942, this switch was taken out. We brought it down and we used it for a switch in the depot. So it looked like this up until 1995, when we put this siding back in to run the steam engine up to and use it for an emergency siding. So this track, we'll put the track right back. I did not bring a picture of that though. The hotel again from the northeast side, as it looked like in 1887. Same area, foundation work today. And that's, as of last summer, what the stables look like. Now those are the trails I'm telling you have not been used in over 70 years. They're all over up there. People used to hike them, put burrows up them, and then, other than a few fallen trees here and there, you can follow the trails all over that Paul's Grove laid out. Another one of the bridges on the upper end of Dark Canyon, still across. It was very popular in the evenings at the halfway house to go to this area. It's, probably 300-400 yards beyond the hotel up Dark Canyon. It is the Aspen Grove fire area. They used to take the dead aspen trees, make them into a teepee, and have huge bonfires and sing-alongs at night. It was very popular at the hotel. If you get up on top of the pipeline and look down at this area, you can still see the rings where these trees were burned in the ground years ago. Now, this is a slide that bugged me for a long time. 3 years ago, one of the last things I did in October before we shut the railway down, I was taking some pictures, and I just shot this. This is looking from the corner of where the hotel would have been across the creek. I couldn't figure out what the heck this was because the other shot, the actual shot of this was blurry. I went up there the next spring. The outhouses were across the creek. This min sign was nailed to a tree 70 years ago. It was probably a little bitty tree. And now it's about 60 feet up in the air. Now, like I said, they did run a post office for many years up there. This is some of the stuff that I've collected through the years, mailed from the halfway house and brought down by a burro to Manitou. Occasionally, some of the other stuff that you might find still up there is Harry Paul's Grove signature, all over the place. Up at Grandview Rock, there is a tree up there with a lot of people's initials carved into it in the late 1890s. If it says HP and they're all over up there, that's Harry Paul's Grove's famous initials. I've been working lately on trying to find out exactly who stayed at the halfway house. The Manitou and Colorado City newspapers are real nice in listing everybody that stayed at the Cliff House or the Barker House or the Masons or Ruxton or whatever. The halfway's never listed. This is right below the halfway house. I have talked to his relatives in Chicago, and he stayed there the last year that they were open to the public. There's some other names up there that I haven't tracked down. Being an engineer, in the fall, we have to conduct on the trains. Our conductors are seasonal employees. Most of them are college kids, so they're gone. 2 years ago, I met this person's, I guess it'd be son? Anyway, his parents, her name is Carolyn Eckert, honeymooned and stayed at the halfway house in 1918. And so he sent me a picture. He's got some pictures of the inside of the hotel that he sent me. And there's a lot of other people. Simmons stayed there, and there's a lot of people. Right above the halfway house is Ruxton Park, Colorado. If you've been on our train or ridden up there, there's a power plant there. There's a huge water intake pond right about where that burro stand. Tom Paul's Grove developed this whole area. He was trying to make a town up there. It was platted town. They were going to have 7 streets, 3 city parks. They actually sold 16 cabins up in their sites. That sign there says lots for sale if you were coming the other direction. One of the cabins that still remains up there is the Abbott cabin. Unfortunately, last April with the heavy snow, we had the entire front roof finally collapsed. To the right of the picture, you can kind of see a swing hanging on a tree. That's the only reason I think my son goes hiking with me off and on up there is to play on that swing. I've got pictures of him for 5 years growing up on there, but that cabin pretty much still exists up there. The other cabin was John Paulsgrove's cabin. When John took over the hotel, he got fed up with the residents at the hotel in the summer, the tourists right off and on. So he'd go around the rock, and he had this cabin kind of hid up in there. That's what the cabin looks like today. It's right above the powerhouse in Ruxton Park. They also tried mining up there. If there was gold on the other side of the mountain, there ought to be gold on this side. 2 mines were sunk up there. This happens to be the fluoride tunnel. It is caved in up at the top. The reason that the granite here is so dark, it does contain fluoride in it. There are rails sticking out way up at the top, and I'm going to find out this summer if the carts are still in there. Supposed to be a picture taken in 1976, still showed mine carts in it. They went back in about 800 feet at least. It didn't find anything. To the left of this picture, which I don't have a photograph of, there's another mine called the Two Fools Gold Mine. It is a vertical shaft that goes straight down 37 feet, and all it's in it is rose quartz. They never did find any gold on the mountain, but they did try a couple of different attempts there. This is the power plant that runs at Ruxton Park during the summer months. It produces 1 megawatt of power for the city of Manitou and Colorado Springs. This is probably going to be the last year that this power plant operates. It was built in 1925. It is one of the oldest operating hydroelectric power plants west of the Mississippi River. The city of Colorado Springs built a new power plant up at Tesla. They need extra water, so they put a bypass in during the winter here. They're going to be taking water off the one side of this plant, running it through the pipeline, if everything works right, to the top of Mount Manitou Incline, and then back flushing to Rampart Reservoir. So they don't think they have enough water to run this in the summer, but they're not sure. This plant will run this year from April until August. There is a move up there. The caretaker, which I'm good friends with that live in Oregon, are trying to put this on the historical register so at least the building won't get torn down. This is the power plant inside. 1925 technology. And as you can see, it was built by Wood & Weber of Denver in 1925. Now, this power plant was built to replace the one at the Pikes Peak power plant down at Minnie. That power plant was originally built to power the construction of the Strickler Tunnel, which is a water diversion tunnel, but this one replaced it. This is Dennis and Barbara Rasmussen. They live in Oregon 6 months out of the year. They come out here and run the power plant. It is a 65-mile drive from their power plant. We're back to Cripple Creek in Colorado Springs if they have to go get groceries. So as the conductors say, if you see a white vehicle, it could be Domino's. Last year we did recover the remains of 5 Domino's pizza delivery men. So, Grand View Rock, this is a hook photograph. That's fake clouds up at the top. Is a place that it took me 2 years to find. I thought I knew where it was, but it kind of moved around, and Dennis is an avid hiker, so we've gone all through Ruxton Park up there, and we finally found it. This is what Grand View Rock looks like today. Unfortunately, the only time I've been up there twice yet. It was kind of cloudy. But to give you an idea of the view you can see, this is looking toward Pikes Peak. One of the things I decided, since we were put halfway house siding back in, was we had to have a copy of the original sign that was there. So this is when I painted up, it's a duplicate. We park our flat car there during the summer months. We also use it, section crew, to get out of the way in an emergency passing sign, or if we need it. Occasionally we do run specials up there. We'll be running 2 specials this year up to the power plant, some stuff for a Rocky Mountain Railroad Club and a narrow gauge convention. And then I'm also running our steam program, our own operating steam engine we've had up at Halfway House one time. So, in fact, we had the steamer out this year. We're playing around in the yard in October. We're going to have it out next September, playing around one day. Now, in 1949, for some reason, they put this water tank up there. I guess it was a secondary emergency stop. The old wooden one was taken down. There is not a scheduled water stop for the old steamers. I know it was 1949 because this is what's left of Colorado Midland, or Midland Terminal tank car number 501. It says so right on the bottom of it. And when the Midland shut down, the shop superintendent at the Midland was also our shop superintendent, so we got a lot of Colorado Midland stuff up at the shop, machinery, tools, all kinds of stuff. Now, if you went up there today, actually last week, this is roughly what you're going to find up there. We do have a little bit of snow at 8,910 feet. Halfway house sidings over there. The hotel would have been straight where that ends. and there's a little bit of snow still at Dark Canyon. Now I threw this in mainly because over on the table over here I've picked up stuff that I've picked up, or my son's picked up at the different dumps up at the hotel and stuff. There's a sign I got last year, right where my hand is. And in one of those photographs was a sign that says City of Colorado Springs, no trespassing, and it was dated 1916. Well, the new caretaker for the Upper Lake Reservoir last year happened to be goofing around, and he found 37 of these things, but it's the 1936 version, and there's a copy of that canvas sign over there. The nails are still in that tree with yellow canvas on them for the no trespassing, although the tree's grown up. Well, my hand would be right where that sign is right there. That's all I got on the halfway house. Hopefully, in about 3 years, the book on the hotel will be out. I want it out for the 75th birthday of it being gone. So, thanks, guys.